Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
You may know by now that I get pretty excited when people walk through the figurative BIV door with an understanding of reality that is virtually impossible to diagnose from the outside. From the moment I met Dylan Wolff and he explained what he was up to, I couldn't believe what he was solving. We will go into some depth as to what he's building at Conserve, but it's the vehicle for the deletion of a stunning quantity of waterway, as well as the provision of a multi-layered, deeply practical and financial set of value propositions, all of which drop straight to their customers' bottom line. Once you see it, you really can't unsee it. Dylan also happens to be, as we say back home, a really lovely bloke to spend time with. Please enjoy my conversation with Dylan Wolff. Dylan, how lovely to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you, Tom. How are you?
Good, as ever. I look forward to all of these, but you hold a very kind of special place in our hearts because there's always a variability of the degree of expectedness of the companies that end up being burnt islanders that are nice enough to deign to accept our capital. And you were definitely one of the unexpected. And we'll go kind of into why, but my first question for you is, how did you find out about what you're working on?
So the start of everything dates back a while. I guess to give context, I grew up in Southern California. My whole life has been kind of one drought to the next, always taught to save water, to think about water use, which is good, that's been ingrained in us from a young age. But a couple droughts ago, restaurants were, in an effort to save water, they were not serving drinking water to customers unless it was requested. And so that was their way to save 8 ounces at a time. Do you remember that?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So at the time, I wasn't working in the restaurant industry or anything like that. I was a product developer with a real passion for sustainability. But my best friend was working as a bartender. And he came to me one day and he said, okay, so the restaurant I work at is not serving drinking water, which is great to save water. But in the back of house, in the kitchen, they're running the faucet at full blast for my entire shift every day, defrosting frozen food. And that's how I became aware of the problem. And then for a long time, I was just every restaurant I would go to, I would ask, because it became like this pain point and kind of obsession, curiosity. And, a lot of people would be like, why is this guy asking about our use of frozen food? And they would kind of dance around it. And then ultimately they would say, yep, that's just an industry standard. So this giant niche problem kind of exposed itself and I got to work.
How long did that go on for? Well, you were going into restaurants for how long, saying hey, what's going on in that sink in the back?
A long time. I had another job and it wasn't necessarily something that I thought I was going to kind of dive into. Then it became like this curiosity point for probably like a year or so. And then it kind of escalated, right? And then I started researching health code and why. Because every time I would hear from either a chef or even, front of house people that would go back into the kitchen and see the faucet running, they would all say the same thing. It's the way it is. It's like, we have these options and this is the one that we're forced to use because of time constraints and space constraints. And then, so I started diving into health code and understanding why. And then, I even attended like a public health, basically like the head of different health departments have a quarterly meeting. And I was able to go and sit at one of those and ask some questions. And then I just started sketching out solutions and talking with as many smart people as I could in product development, product design, manufacturing. In all, obviously the health departments, had multiple meetings with different health departments just to like find out more about why and how we could solve it.
Had anybody asked them before? Or had anybody queried themselves before? Or was this just like, this really is straight up the way in which hadn't even occurred to people that this was crazy?
The funny thing is, during that period of time, it sounded like no one had asked them. But fast forward to where we are now and going into these meetings in kitchens, 9 out of 10 times, the guy who, or the team member, I should say, who's doing this task goes, "Oh, you stole my idea." Like they knew that there was something there, but they were like, it was just so ripe for someone to come along with a good solution, but no one was thinking about it. I think by nature of how these kitchens are set up, unless you're working in them, you have no idea what's going on back there. Unless you're thinking of like the highest of the high end that has like that open kitchen concept. And most often, sometimes they have frozen food, but you're not seeing the prep period. You're seeing them cooking. It's one of those things where unless you were like in it or happen to have a best friend who walked into it, you like kind of didn't know about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like maybe you're going to sell one of these to like Noma or whatever, where it's closed, or maybe it's still in Japan, whatever. Yeah, the open kitchen, but it's so literally and physically hidden. I just love the idea that you kind of exposed this idea of the exposure of reality. I think is so interesting. You said something that I love, which is you just had this curiosity. Can you describe how that felt? Most people would be like, "Oh, that's interesting," but it just grabbed you. And then you did something about it, which I like. Is there anything that you can kind of explain to us about what it felt like and why you felt compelled? Is there anything for others to kind of learn from, translate curiosity into action? Or was it just natural?
It was curiosity mixed with frustration. It just seemed so silly. When you started to think about the scale, you could do basic calculations of like, okay, my friend, we could measure the flow rate of a commercial kitchen sink. And then we can multiply that by his 10-hour shift. And then you could think about how much water is being wasted just in a week at that one kitchen. And then at the time, you don't know the scale of the problem. You think, oh, maybe it's just gastropubs. But there's a lot of those, and then you start digging and you're like, no, this is in grocery stores. This is in stadiums. This is colleges, universities, senior living centers, hotels. And then the business part kicks in, right? We're talking about the entrepreneurial side. I always knew that I wanted to do something. And I always used to think to myself, like, I really just needed that spark where everything kind of intersected on solving a problem that I'm passionate about, and a problem that you could introduce a simple solution with big impact. After the year or so of just kind of kicking it around and asking questions, that was kind of the inflection point of like, okay, this curiosity is now frustration and is now opportunity. That's when and then I'm sure this is when you talk to other entrepreneurs who have started something, they think they've had this aha moment at the beginning and 10 months from now, we're going to have this thing, this operation. It's never A to B to C. It's been the most chaotic and stressful and fun and frustrating and crushing and then building back up. It's been a crazy process from that curiosity to where we are now.
Crushing is a good word. So Jessica and I, our head of operations, describe it as standing on rakes. And the rake is always there as soon as something good happens.
Yes.
All right. The one thing, if you're reading our like celebrations on LinkedIn, is that you can there's always something else going on that's like, oh God, why is this all so hard? The battle against entropy is the worst. So just walk us through, what is it that you built?
We've built a solution to that problem. So commercial kitchens of all shapes, sizes, and quality levels rely pretty heavily on frozen food. Mostly frozen proteins, but sometimes sauces and vegetables even sometimes. And the way they thought primarily is by running their prep sink. The faucet pours water over the food and down the drain for hours at a time. So if you think about like an 8-pound turkey breast, that's roughly the size of a volleyball. It takes about 5 hours of running water, just going over the food inefficiently, hitting one single point of it and going down the drain. What we built is a solution that fits into the existing sink space that they were already using to defrost. And it has an approach that's kind of very specific and proprietary to how we recirculate and regulate temperature of the water, where we're able to save 98% of that water that's going down the drain, do that defrosting time in half the time, and leave behind a higher quality and safer product, because all of that food is completely submerged. Everything is getting the same level of agitation. There are no hot zones in the water or in the sink because of we're getting that same even flow around everything. And so that's what we've done. And then the other thing that we've added, because this is less about the kind of sustainability, but more about the efficiency side, is these kitchens are also having to chill down hot foods at the end of service. So if you have like a big thing of soup that's left over, you have to bring that temperature. It's usually at like 150. You have to get that down to 70 Fahrenheit within 2 hours. And the way they've done that in the past are extremely expensive blast chilling equipment, which is $30,000 to $50,000, takes up a ton of space. So not realistic for most kitchens. They'll take and go directly into the freezer, which can really destroy the condenser and it can even cause some mold growth in the freezer. Or they use chill paddles, which are these cheap plastic things where they have to go and stir it around. So our conserved DC-O2, the DC stands for defrost and chill, can also be used for the kind of the reverse thermodynamics, where you create that ice bath. And by us agitating that water around the hot, we're able to drop that temperature down into the safe zone within 2 hours. So there's a dual use. So we have the defrosting side, which is heavy on water efficiency, time efficiency, financial efficiency, safety, and quality. And then we have the chilling, which is really all about time, efficiency, and best use of space.
Super helpful. By the way, defrost and chill is an interesting spin on the Netflix.
Yeah,
thing.
It's got different connotations to it for sure.
So one of the things I've loved since the first time we spoke is the light bulbs that come on about the myriad value propositions that are coming out of this thing. It seems so simple, water down drain. But actually what you then discovered is the whole bunch of relatively haptic problems that are hanging out in kitchens that you can help solve. What have you learned about the appreciation of kitchens for each of those value propositions? What have you learned about the nature of what resonates and when? A lot of stuff that is valuable. How does it hit? How does it land?
That's been massive for us, because having the multiple value propositions can dictate our conversations depending on who we're speaking with. So if we're talking to the head of sustainability, we're leaning into the fact that we could save that kitchen nearly 1 million gallons of water a year in a single kitchen. But if we're talking to the chef, he might not really care about water, but he's going to care about quality, safety, and time savings. And if we're talking to the team that's doing it, the actual prep cooks, to say, hey, we can give you 2.5 hours back in your day where you're not worried about this anymore, or you're getting things to marinate faster, or, all those benefits. And so what started as purely about water savings for me and maintains about water savings, the kind of dumb joke that I can tell people is that we can Trojan horse those water savings in. If the customer doesn't care about saving water, they're going to care about saving money. They're going to care about saving time. They're going to care about upticks in quality and safety. And that's fine with us. Take a conserve unit, bring it into your system. We're going to save you water, and we're going to be happy about that as well.
It's such an effective, it's kind of like the sort of Swiss Army knife, like, oh, you don't want to use the pen knife, don't want to use a corkscrew. Fine, here are the tweezers. That's the manifestation of the value proposition. I wasn't expecting to go here now, but how, obviously pricing is relative to value provided. How did you think about sharing that value? You don't need to go into what the pricing is and the individual numbers are, but just conceptually, how did you think about landing on a number that represented unignorable value, both for you and for the customer?
We're selling a piece of kitchen equipment for commercial kitchens. There is really nothing else that has a direct ROI that's out there, right? That you could figure out through complex stuff. You need an oven, you need whatever your basic equipment, but to be able to say, let's see your water bill. Let's figure out your defrosting behavior. And that's how much you're going to save in X amount of months. We built a really helpful savings calculator directly into our website. So if we're meeting with someone and they're saying, yeah, also the one thing is our customer has a tendency of downplaying their behavior, or depending on who we're talking to, being completely unaware of it. So if we're talking to someone in a corporate office, they're like, no, our standard operating procedure is going to be refrigeration. We never run the faucet. And then we go and we show up at that kitchen and they're like, we run the faucet 5 to 6 hours every day, defrosting. So
you want to check cameras or what's going on?
So that's a tricky thing. So having this savings calculator where we could type in their behavior, type in their how many days they're defrosting, even down to their water and sewer rates, and then show them, this is how much you're spending on water every year. And so our pricing to get there, obviously, you have to take into account just the economics of the hardware and the kind of design that we've put together and what our product looks like. And then creating that value for our customers and creating the value for us as well.
I really want you to go through the COVID thing because we were already working on this. And then of all of the disruptions that happened to entrepreneurs during that process, for somebody whose target market is, the kitchens that may well have been functioning, but very difficult to go and see them in person, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the best way of getting to this is just give us the arc from when you started. So, right, I'm going to do this now. Just tell us that story, what it felt like, what your thought process at the various junctures, what you did, how you just got yourself through that period of time.
Like, to say COVID was a difficult time is like probably the greatest understatement in the history of understatements. It is horrible. And it would I think we're still all dealing with the ramifications. Those who lost people, obviously much more so than those whose lives were disrupted. But to give context of the company, in a lot of ways, it was massive for us because in 2019, I had built, with a little bit of help, but not much engineering prowess, product design prowess. I built basically a proof of concept. That's where that curiosity and obsession brought me. Through a random serendipitous mutual friend, I got introduced to a chef at Nobu in Malibu. I think without their support, this wouldn't have continued on the path it did. So that's a little later into 2019. And I show up with my dual bucket system that I had manufactured for cheap. And it was, had the things, but not really. And they were like, yeah, we'll use it. They were so awesome and so supportive. And that gave us a lot of confidence. Right? In my mind, I'm like, okay, if one of the best restaurants in the world is using this and there are problems, and if there's a problem, I'm out there within 24 hours fixing it or giving them new stuff or whatever. But I'm also getting all this information for them to dictate the future. So we use that confidence. We get out into a bunch of kitchens with this thing that I built. And it was far from perfect. It had a lot of issues, but it more or less was doing what we hoped it would do. And people were happy with it for the most part. COVID hits. The first really group of businesses that were affected by that shutdown were restaurants. Immediately, they had no business. It became very clear to us that reaching out to a restaurant in this time to try and pitch them on a new piece of technology and get them to buy something was not only borderline cruel.
And my risk.
Yeah, it was stupid. It was a stupid use of time. So the thing where I look back in hindsight, where I consider myself incredibly lucky, is I didn't quit my day job at that point. I didn't bring on any investment. It was all through kind of bootstrapping and minor personal, just putting any money we made, just kind of went back into it. At that point, it was kind of just me also. I didn't have anyone to answer to, so there was no real timelines on anything. And I knew at that point that this wasn't the product anyway. This was the seed of the idea that would be the product. This was the proof that there is a market out for this product and a real need for it and an enthusiastic user of it. I took my time. I knew at that point I needed to find actual engineering, actual industrial designing. And I went down a path actually with a different group. It didn't work out. But because COVID was going on, it almost lowered the stakes a little bit. I still had my job. I was working. It was crushing. At the time, it was the biggest, most crushing thing that had happened to me in any sort of professional setting, this not working out. I lost a lot of weight. I was not sleeping. I was very anxious about it because I put so much into this already. But that was the period where I said, I'm taking another swing at this. This didn't work out. Everyone kind of that was working on it was so amicable and we worked it all out. Then I found this other industrial designer, and that was at this point 2023, because there was long lapses in between of just inaction because of what was going on in the world. And that propelled us to kind of continue and take all that customer feedback that we had gotten and build the product that we knew we wanted to always build. During that period, talk about crushing, using that word again. But now in hindsight, it's if we didn't go through that, we wouldn't be around. It would have been a drastically different thing for us. And we wouldn't have the product that we have today that we're so kind of proud of and feel so great about.
It also kind of shows up in your philosophy of kind of building the company where you already know that you can provide this value proposition with not a lot. You don't necessarily, need a zillion people and massive overheads and all this kind of stuff, that actually there's a huge amount of value to be provided to the market through what is a beautifully designed, by the way, kudos, beautifully designed product. But then we'll get onto this kind of a sequence of product to hit various kind of value props within the kitchen. How do you think about running lean now? Do you think that you would have a different attitude to building your company if things had been easier?
My thoughts on running lean are, while like I made it sound like the technology itself is simple, it's actually not.
It's not at all.
And we work with this incredible designer who we've brought on as our head of R&D. And that's a really cool story in itself, of just like a guy who's been a gun for hire forever, had his own firm.
Tell us about
Tim. And then I'll shift back, but Tim Nugent is our head of R&D and design. And I found Tim, like everyone finds everyone, on the internet. I was looking for an industrial designer nearby, and I interviewed a bunch of different ones and really cool ones. And Tim, there was something about him where at the first meeting I had with him, he's a very kind of stoic guy. And I was like, he either thinks I'm an idiot or he's really into it. I can't tell. And we had a couple other meetings, and then we started working together and building this thing. But Tim's been at it for a while. He's had his firm for, I think, 20 years, something like that. And I think we're the first project where he's ever presented to us that he wanted to be like. So we're in China together. We're meeting with our contract manufacturer. We're on this like whirlwind trip where we went China and then Thailand and then flew back through, and we're spending this great week together. And he's just like, I would like to be a part of this in a more official way. And it was the best thing that I could ever hear. Like, I wanted that to happen anyway. I just didn't know the timing, and I didn't know if he'd be interested because he has his own business and everything like that. And so that to me was like, of all the incredible, like, yes, this giant kitchen wants to start testing and they want to roll out and whatever, like having a guy who's worked on a million different design projects, see the value and believe in the team and want to be a part of it has been like one of the coolest things that's happened. And working with him has been such a joy. And he's just so incredible. Like you said, the design of the product, like he could take the ideas that I had going and make them real.
It is. Everybody listening to this, I mean, immediately go to Conserve's website. It's just beautiful. I mean, I want one of these, and like, well, I don't know, huge amount of defrosting. I do it every once in a while, but like everyone else, I don't pour water down the
There you go.
Just put cold water in a bowl, classic thing. So
unsafe. We're going to make it safer. We got to move that water around. So we're making a smaller one, and we can go into like the development pipeline too, also like kind of our thought process there. But yeah, to your answer about leanness, we have a killer team. We have killer contractors that we work with, like amazingly talented engineers. Our electrical engineer is just like the coolest guy. And Brett, my partner, who I could talk about as well, is kind of our CRO, and he's making amazing things happen. But I think to your point of where we see opportunity to grow the team is on that sales side. We also, like in a cool way, we brought on a bunch of outside sales rep groups that are now representing Conserve, and to see us on kind of their line item list next to the Electrolux and Vitamix and Wolff and all of these like well-known, awesome players in the space, and then have Conserve. And they're not, the biggest one that we're working with reps a total of 50 manufacturers, so to get through that vetting and get their level of excitement and buy into what we're doing has also been really validating and cool. But yeah, we see potential to grow on the sales side for sure. And then try and continue to be as lean as possible because we know it's possible to do so. And we see the opportunities coming about that we've created.
No question. What have you learned about the go-to-market? What have you learned about the sequencing of it? What have you learned about getting this product into the market, from you doing it yourself to Brett coming on, all of this work? Because it's such an interesting process of the diagnosis of reality, which is a continuation of the work that you did at the beginning of the project.
It takes longer than expected. It's a different industry. In a lot of ways, communication is done differently. So depending on who you're speaking with, if it's a multinational corporation with thousands of locations versus a team who owns and operates 15 restaurants, and if we're trying to get through the chef, there are different ways we have to go about it. A lot of times we're showing up places, talking over text rather than emails, helpful getting people on the phone. And then when you're working with the bigger ones, they have their vetting process too. So we always go through foods because we're a new piece of technology and we're dealing with the food prep. We go through their food safety department. which is great because that's more validation for us when we get through there. And then we either get passed to their sustainability or their culinary, and then we come in and we do pilots. Tim always talks about it like leaving the puppy. So if we get a unit into a kitchen, we'll go and check in, if it's a local one. What he's seen multiple times now is when we show up, the rush to it of someone saying, "You're not taking that, are you?" He's like, you can't take the puppy away from them once you've given it to them. So like once we get it into a kitchen, things move pretty well and pretty quickly. For instance, we have this 14-day kind of satisfaction guarantee, like try it for 2 weeks, no, send it back. Well, no one sent anything back. We've had 0 returns once we get it into a kitchen, which is awesome. And again, validating. But the initial process is a lift, right? It's like, sometimes you have to convince them that that problem exists if there's a disconnect there. So if you're talking to the corporate level and they're like, no, and then you have to convince them it's a big enough problem where you're showing them water use, time waste, all of that. And then you got to get the shot, right? And the shot is getting in the kitchen, getting a unit to them. But once we get that, and we've been pretty good at doing that, even with some giant corporations that really have a guard up, things are going well. It's just a little bit slower than what you think because there's a lot of hurdles to kind of get past, but we're getting past them.
It being tricky is actually awesome. Just because, well, naturally people are going to need like 2 of these, but as you get to know this, it's a really interesting source of moat for the business. I always think about kind of go-to-market channels and approaches and the various different kind of stakeholders is like learning multiple languages. But once you learn them all and you can stitch them together, you've got, as Helmut would kind of put it, like it's an element of process power that is really quite difficult to replicate without going through all the steps that you did. I think it's really powerful. But one thing that often the reason why that we really like founders to be going kind of direct to market themselves, almost like, founder-led sales all the way through kind of 5 million, which is the reasonable proxy for product market fit, though I think you found this much earlier. When you get into distributors, they understand the language of the kitchen, but adding new things to the line can be tricky because, they eat what they kill, basically, and they already know how to sell the stuff they already know how to sell. And so adding something to the line can be tricky, but you've managed to navigate that really quite well and quite fast. So talk to us about what you've learned about getting into distribution, especially getting into distribution early.
We're looking right now in the early days, the distribution as just being extra, right? Like anything that comes from that, amazing. It validates us. Being up on those line sheets next to these other manufacturers and saying we're repped by X, Y, and Z, but we're not slowing down on creating our own opportunities. Oftentimes we're creating the opportunities and then we'll bring them in. And that's us being a good partner to them and incentivizing future opportunity growth that they create. Because like you said, at the beginning, there's a lot of education for them to get up to speed and they have to kind of get the bug of understanding like, oh yeah, this is a big opportunity for me as well. We think that this year, on all fronts, really, we launched technically in March of this year with our production product. We had some samples in the field getting tested before that. This year is really about education, awareness, and a lot of like laying foundation, whether it's setting things up with these rep groups so they're ready to go when we need them to ramp up, or setting things up with these opportunities of these corporations where we're getting all the information up front that they need so we can maximize the opportunity in the next couple of months or whatever it is. So that foundation that we're laying now on the rep group side of things, we're not expecting overnight for them to make all these moves where we're sitting back and they're handling all of our sales. It's basically us being a good partner to them. That being said, our first rep group that we signed with has brought us our biggest potential deal to date. They basically had an expo in their kitchen and we were introduced to several people and now we're kind of off and running in this opportunity because of that. So you never know where it's going to come from, but yeah, I totally agree with that. Like we need to be driving the bus on revenue and growth until they're comfortable and until they're able to create the opportunities without us creating them for them.
Exactly. But I think it's really great because it's so obviously the most efficient route into your customer, the people who are already selling them stuff that when they turn up, they're already primed to like, okay, where's the new sort of set piece of hardware? But even if it does take ages, starting at where you're doing it now and nurturing that over time just means you're bringing forward that kind of distribution-based revenue, which I wouldn't recommend to everybody. But I think you did really, really nicely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's exactly how we're thinking about it. It's like what we do now saves us time later. We know that we need them to scale. If they're not scaling for us right now, fine. But if we started this process a year and a half from now, there would still be the year build up with them. So let's do it now. We have our product. We're going to be iterating and innovating on that product, building different options, sizes, accessories, things like that. But we're here and we have everything that we would need for them to sell. So let's just start this process now and then we'll get there when we get there.
Let's move on to the product. Can you just talk us through a couple of updates to the design or the design decisions? Because you're a really good product person and you obviously work with a superb product person.
Thank you.
Walk us through what the iteration process looks like. So something that changed between the various versions. How did that sort of go through, come about? Anything that's unexpected or that you think that people can learn about how this is done well?
To start with, our design principle from the beginning on this has been to build something that fits in, that also fits out. So we want something that looks like it does live in a commercial kitchen, but catches your eye in that commercial kitchen. There's a ton of turnover in those kitchens, and we want a new employee to see something and say, that's definitely an appliance and a piece of equipment in here, but what is that? That looks cool. We wanted it to be well designed, not only for the sake of like anything we design, we want to be well designed, but we wanted it to stand out. Not stand out in so much where people are like, why is this thing here? Like it clearly looks like it belongs in the commercial kitchen, right?
Yeah.
And some of that came down to material choices, color choices, things like that. But for instance, this first generation that we have in the market, when we were talking with a customer and talking about like bells and whistles and things and how I still remember one person saying, I just want something that goes on and off. And so we're like, we're going to throw a switch on this first one and it's just going to have defrost, off, chill. And that's it. And we're going to get it out there and it's going to be as simple as possible on the user interface, user experience side. The actual kind of how it works, we got that. And it doesn't really matter who's doing what, it's going to work. But as we're growing, we want to add a little more sophistication to it. So for instance, this next generation that's going to be coming out next year, early next year, we have a completely different display and interface where instead of a knob, it's going to be kind of a membrane keypad where you can choose power, defrost, chill, and it's going to have a display that's constantly displaying the temperature of the water in the basin. And it'll also be color coded. So if the water's within health standards under 60, it has to be under 70. So if it's under 66, that means we're gently warming it. That color coded will be blue. If it goes between 66.1 and 69.9, it's yellow. And then anything over 70, it's red. So that way our customer will know, like, I got to pull this food for a safety feature, or I got to add some ice and get the water cooled down. So just adding things like that. We're also building out, our product's called the DC-O2. We're building a DC-O1 that's going to be about roughly half the size for kitchens with less frequent defrosting needs. It'll be a bit less sort of powerful in speed uptake, but we'll still same idea on water savings. And then we're also building out like a filter program. So to kind of, if things come out of the bag when they're being defrosted, it keeps them out of the system. It makes cleanup a lot easier. It'll be kind of a subscription model on those soft filters. So Tim and I love to talk and we love to iterate and ideate on how we can continue. So we have like a long development pipeline of things that we could add to the system. But we think where we're at now is we're meeting our customer where they are and where they want to be. It does the job. What Brett always says is the thing I don't have to worry about is the product doing what I say it does, because it does it. And that's the most important part for us.
How do you think about the really banner? I mean, you mentioned Nobu, right? They were instrumental at the beginning of this. But the kind of the banner deployments that you have and you're negotiating, like, how do you think about that? 80/20 turns up everywhere. Like, big banner deployments are really important, but there's also this sort of area of like kind of workhorse, quote unquote, of your tail of sales, that when all of it's going to be really important. How do you think about the importance of the banner sales versus just kind of getting the numbers up and getting the proof points in the field? Has the banner sales been as useful as it looks like? Or do people just think, oh, that doesn't actually apply to us? And
it's a combination. For the longest time, being able to say who was using the product was a door opener. Because if you're a piece of new technology, even if we're going to a 5-location spot that no one has heard of unless you're in that neighborhood, and we're saying X, Y, and Z are using it, they're like, we should take a look. It's not you'd be the first using it. Some people like that. We've had conversations with a couple of customers where they're like, is anyone in our area or in our field using it? And we'd be like, no, you'd be the first. And they're like, we'd like to keep it that way because we're the innovators. And they like, that's something they're into, which is great also. But having those banner sales, I think it generates a lot of value for the product, for the company at large, for our ability to go and tell our story, because you can travel anywhere in the world and say blank is using it, fill in the blanks of any globally recognized brand. And it is like, oh, that's something. But to your point, we also need to focus on the non-banner sales to drive the numbers. We have a couple in the works with brands that when I started this, I'd never really even heard of. They're regional and they have 40 locations or whatever it is, but they love using it. And we're hoping to roll out to all of their locations soon. And that's a huge driver for our business. So I think to your point, it's a combination and they both service each other in ways.
How big is it? Just talk to us about the, huge markets are necessary for people in our business, but just walk us through how you think about the size of the market in the context of how many individual units all the way across your product plan or product pipeline. What are we talking about in terms of market size here?
Domestically, just cutting it to the domestic market, there's about 1 million restaurant commercial kitchens in the United States. Then you talk about hotels, country clubs, hospitals. We just got into a great hospital that we're super excited to help them out. The market's massive, but when we're talking about impact, right? If we get based off of the calculations on the water savings, 15,000 units is going to save billions of gallons of water every year.
Give us kind of a practical kind of equivalent. If you've got 15,000 units, it's the equivalent of X. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but you get up to the volume of water consumed by the city of Dallas.
Yeah, if we're at 15,000 units, we're just under, depending on the frequency of use, obviously, but based off of the average that was done in that third-party study, we're just under 10 billion gallons of water annually.
One of the things you've been able to access startlingly quickly is the rebates from cities in order to cut water use.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
This is an area where the light bulbs come on really quickly, which is the people who are looking after kind of water efficiency within the urban environment are like, God, yes.
Well, then I succeeded because it was not a quick process, Tom. It was
fast from the outside.
That's amazing. I hope one day someone calls me an overnight success, but the rebate process, talk about another thing that's been so validating for us and when we're having these conversations with customers, because we were fortunate enough to find out about a program offered through Metropolitan Water District called the ICP program, which is Innovative Conservation Project. They give you a bit of money and you find a third party who will do a study on water conservation. And we were able to do that and get this third party study commissioned. And I remember having a conversation when we found out that we got the grant to do the study. And I said, so just kind of naive, I was like, so when this study is done and we have the savings, you guys, maybe you'll put a rebate on our product. And I was basically laughed out of the Zoom call. They're like, oh, no, but then you fast forward several years later and through basically never taking no for an answer and also continuing to grow the relationships on a personal level with some of the people and just keep them aware of updates and this new product and having this killer new product design. And now Metropolitan Water District gives an $800 rebate for any customer in Southern California to buy one. And through that, we've been able to find opportunities in Tampa Bay, Florida, and Portland, Oregon, and Marin County, and South Lake Tahoe. And we're looking to grow that out. But what appears to be a quick decision, it took a ton of effort and work, but it's really helpful when we can go to our customers and say, the people you pay your water bill to, they believe in this technology so much that they're going to give you money to buy it so you use less water.
So good. I just want to take a step back. You're so obviously suited specifically for this business, but just kind of the job of the entrepreneur. I'm curious, what do you like most about being an entrepreneur and what do you like least?
I like that every day looks pretty different. And I don't like that every day looks pretty different. In some ways that's the best. I love having the freedom to dip in and out of areas that if you have a standard job, you're just not able to focus on that. So some days I'm so deep in product design with Tim, or some days I'm so deep in testing, or some days I'm so deep in state bureaucracy. And then also trying to close deals and sales. And I love that. Like, I really love that and the freedom that comes with that. The part that's difficult, there's some like serious ups and downs, right? And you have to really build your mental strength and confidence to just stay kind of as even keel as you can. Like you said, when you get the best news, there's oftentimes a rake that you're going to step on shortly down the road from there.
Mean reduction.
It's all the poem if you can keep your head, when things are good, when things are bad, just keep pushing. I think perseverance has been the one thing to take from this, is that if you like believe in something and want to solve a problem and you think you have a good solution for it, just keep pushing. That's been and you have to have the support system around you that on days where you don't feel like pushing anymore, they bring you up to want to push.
It sounds like you might have preempted my final question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and you can just see above. What I just wanted to take a second to kind of congratulate you. Every time we speak, every time I think about Conserve, obviously every time we're kind of like working through, I love this idea so much because it is something that is so non-obvious before you find out about it. But as soon as the light bulb comes on, you are just amazed that this has been allowed to be reality, and the solving of that reality is just a fundamentally hugely worthwhile thing to go after. But you have been just so resilient. Your perseverance through all of the ups and downs of the journey that you've been on, I think, is just totally exemplary for anybody who's looking to go after this sort of quixotic endeavor of the manipulation of entropy. This is awesome. So, because nobody has actually preempted our final question before, and every episode has ended with a final question, so we're still going to do it. So don't worry, the answer is see above. But if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
It really is to see above. It's perseverance. If you believe in it enough and you have the right support around you, just don't take no for an answer and get after it. I know that you hear it a lot. You hear fail fast a lot in the entrepreneur game. I disagree with it. We'll see though. But I just think that if you fail fast, you don't give yourself the chance to make it better. We had a lot of things that would have been a normal walk away point that happened early on in that COVID period. I'm grateful every day that we kept pushing. I think the perseverance is kind of everything. If you have the idea that's been validated, that's a big part too, is that we got early validation.
That's the critical thing, is that perseverance with something that doesn't make any sense is what you see and you're like, this is just a dead weight loss to everybody. You need to stop doing what you're doing. In your case, really, really hard, but there's no way. I wasn't there. I don't know what it was like inside your head when it was going on, but there's no way it didn't need to happen. Once you got there, that there was going to be enough, the problem was bad enough that you were going to be able to deliver enough value, that you're going to have the product, you're going to understand the market, that you can get it into their hands. And it's just a question of time, and your time builds your moats, right? It builds your credibility. I could agree more. It's with a pinch of salt, but I think this whole idea of fail fast it's probably an even longer conversation. But I think this idea of relentlessness in the pursuit of something that should and needs to happen and is structurally sound is a really, really good piece of advice. Dylan, this is precisely as fun as I thought it would be. You're a good man. It's great to see you, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, this is awesome. You don't get the chance to do this. And when you're just every day pushing, you don't really get the retrospective, the big picture. And so it actually is really nice to put it all in perspective.
Well, it's been so fun to hear. And everyone listening, go and visit CNSRV.com and marvel at a really beautiful piece of product design. And then imagine this in every single one of the million kitchens in the US alone, even before you get international. Dylan, it's been such a pleasure. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Tom.